3 billion people speak an Indo-European language, and nobody could agree on how that happened. For decades, two camps fought over the origin of the world's largest language family. One side said it spread with farming from Anatolia, modern Turkey, 8,000 years ago. The other side said it spread with horseback warriors from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, 5,000 years ago, in one of the most explosive migrations in human history. The trade hypothesis said language could travel without people, through merchants, through cultural exchange, through the slow adoption of a prestige tongue. No migration required. Then the DNA arrived, and it demolished one side of the argument completely. In 2015, the largest ancient DNA study of its time changed everything we thought we knew. Wolfgang Hack, Iosif Lazaridis, and David Reich led a team that sequenced genome-wide data from 69 Europeans who lived between 8,000 and 3,000 years ago. Among those 69 individuals were 9 from the Yamnaya culture, steppe herders who lived north of the Black Sea around 3000 BCE. They herded cattle, buried their dead in earthen mounds called kurgans, and may have built some of the earliest wheeled vehicles. The team also sequenced 4 individuals from the corded ware culture of Central Europe. A later group known for distinctive rope impressed pottery that appeared across northern Europe around 2500 BCE. The comparison of Yamnaya DNA and corded ware DNA produced a result that stunned the field. 75% of the corded ware people's ancestry came directly from the Yamnaya. Two populations living 2,600 kilometers apart were genetically almost the same. 75% is not trade. It is not cultural exchange.
Right.
That is a mass migration. The Y chromosome data was even more stark. Haplogroups common in early European farmers, like G2A, virtually disappeared during the late Neolithic and Bronze Age. They were replaced by R1A and R1B lineages traced directly to the steppe. Lazaridis, one of the study's lead authors, stated that the results made a strong case that the corded ware people spoke a steppe language, and since later Northern Europeans trace even more of their ancestry to the steppe than to the first farmers, the steppe migrants likely brought Indo-European speech to Europe. The steppe ancestry persisted in every sampled Central European from that point forward, all the way to the present day. It is ubiquitous in modern Europeans. A 2022 study found that the typical Yamnaya phenotype was brown eyes, brown hair, and intermediate skin color. None had blue eyes or blonde hair. Those lighter traits appeared later after mixing with European populations. But the 2015 study was only the beginning. In 2018, the same team returned with a far larger data set, and the results in Britain were even more extreme. Olalde and colleagues sequenced 400 prehistoric skeletons from across Europe, including 155 from Britain. The result, at least 90% of Britain's genetic ancestry was replaced when the Beaker people, descendants of steppe migrants, crossed the Channel around 2450 BCE. The people who built Stonehenge, dark-skinned Neolithic farmers descended from Anatolian migrants, were almost entirely replaced by lighter-skinned newcomers carrying steppe DNA. 90% in Britain, 75% in Central Europe. This was not trade. This was replacement. The corded ware grave at Naumburg, Germany, held a family, father, mother, and 2 sons, dating to approximately 2600 BCE. They were among the first people in Central Europe to carry steppe ancestry. But here's the twist that makes this story far more complicated than a simple invasion narrative. The same 2018 Olalde study that proved mass migration in Britain also proved the exact opposite in Iberia. In Spain and Portugal, the Beaker pottery spread without the people. The pots moved. The genes did not. Beaker-associated individuals from Iberia carried Y chromosome lineages common in local Neolithic farming populations, haplogroups I and G2, not the steppe-derived R1b that dominated Central Europe and Britain. Iago Olalde, the study's first author, said this was the first clear example from ancient DNA that pots do not always go hand in hand with people. David Reich, the co-senior author, explained that the large sample sizes made it possible to paint subtler pictures of ancient human variation than anyone could before. The same cultural package, the same pottery, the same burial customs, spread by migration in one place and by cultural diffusion in another. This dual pattern destroyed the simplest versions of both the steppe and the Anatolian hypotheses. Language did not spread by just one mechanism. David Anthony, the archaeologist who had written the defining book on steppe migration, saw his core thesis vindicated by DNA, but with a major caveat. The steppe expansion explained the Indo-European languages of Northern and Eastern Europe. The 2015 paper itself conceded this in its supplementary materials. The ultimate question of the Proto-Indo-European homeland remained unresolved by the data. Colin Renfrew, who had proposed the Anatolian farming hypothesis in 1987, argued that the Yamnaya migration could have been a secondary expansion, carrying already differentiated Indo-European languages rather than the proto-language itself. But the evidence for mass replacement was beyond dispute. The debate shifted to what it meant. In 2024, the debate took another turn. Lazaridis and colleagues published a massive new study. 367 newly reported individuals from 6400 to 2000 BCE, mostly from Russia and the Western steppe expansion. They traced 3 genetic clines converging to form the Yamnaya, a southern cline from Caucasus hunter-gatherers, a northern cline from Eastern European hunter-gatherers, and a mixing zone along the Volga River, where the two streams merged. The study identified a genetically homogeneous core group of 104 Yamnaya individuals. The core Yamnaya, who formed the source population for the westward expansion into Europe. These core Yamnaya were remarkably uniform genetically, far more so than surrounding populations. They had formed from a specific fusion event between Caucasus Neolithic populations and Eastern hunter-gatherers, creating a new and distinctive genetic signature. When this population expanded westward, they did not trickle in. They arrived in numbers large enough to overwrite the genetic signatures of every farming population they encountered. The scale of this migration was staggering. Between roughly 3000 and 2500 BCE, steppe-derived ancestry appeared in Central Europe, Scandinavia, the Baltic, the British Isles, and eventually into South Asia. Finland today has the highest proportion of Yamnaya-derived ancestry in all of Europe, over 50%. Russia and Ukraine follow close behind. Even populations as far south as India carry significant steppe-related admixture. Mark Thomas at University College London said the sheer scale of population replacement was going to surprise many, but added that the more we learn from ancient DNA, the more we see large-scale migration as the norm in prehistory. That statement reframed the entire debate. Migration was not the exception. It was how human history actually worked. The implications for language were immediate. If 75% of Central European ancestry came from the steppe, and if every subsequent population in Northern Europe carried even more steppe DNA, then the language those migrants spoke would have been the dominant tongue from the moment they arrived. Historical linguists had reconstructed Proto-Indo-European vocabulary for centuries. Words for wheel, axle, horse, wool, mead. These words pointed to a pastoralist culture familiar with wheeled vehicles and horse domestication. Exactly, matching the Yamnaya archaeological record. The word for wheel, kweklos, appears in nearly every branch of the Indo-European family. If it was part of the proto-language, then that language existed after the wheel was invented. Around 3500 BCE, that ruled out the Anatolian farming hypothesis for the root language, but the genetics alone could not prove which language the Yamnaya spoke. DNA does not carry language. What it proves is that people moved, and when people move in those numbers, they bring their language with them. The steppe populations had domesticated the horse and developed wheeled transport. two technologies that gave them an unprecedented advantage in mobility over sedentary farming communities. A farming village can produce more food per acre, but a herding population on horseback can cover more ground in a week than a farmer covers in a lifetime. The three landmark studies, Hack 2015, Alalda 2018, and Lazaridis 2024, collectively sequenced over 800 ancient individuals. Together, they tell a consistent story. The Indo-European expansion into most of Europe was carried by migrating people, not by ideas traveling through trade networks. But the scientific consensus comes with a critical qualification. Not all Indo-European languages spread the same way.
Hittite is the oldest attested Indo-European language, and its origin remains completely unresolved.
Lazaridis and colleagues proposed a new framework, an Indo-Anatolian homeland in the North Caucasus, or Lower Volga region, from which both the Anatolian and later steppe branches diverged. This model suggests an older common ancestor than classical Proto-Indo-European, one spoken before the Yamnaya culture even formed. If correct, the Yamnaya carried an already differentiated daughter language, not the root tongue itself. Paul Hegarty, a linguist at the Max Planck Institute, challenged the direct link between Yamnaya migration and Proto-Indo-European. He argued the movement from the steppe may have carried only Baltic, Slavic, and perhaps Germanic, not the entire family. He pointed out that the highest steppe ancestry scores in modern populations include speakers of non-Indo-European languages, like Finnish and Estonian, undermining a simple equation between steppe DNA and Indo-European speech. This is the essential tension at the center of the Indo-European debate in 2026. The genetics prove the migration. The genetics do not prove which language the migrants spoke.
DNA proves people moved. Archaeology shows what they carried. Linguistics shows what survived.
The scale of the Yamnaya expansion is now the best documented migration event in European prehistory. Steppe ancestry reached as far west as Ireland and as far east as the Altai Mountains. In South Asia, Lazaridis and colleagues estimated steppe-related admixture between 6 and 50% across different ethnic groups, with the highest proportions in populations traditionally associated with Indo-Aryan languages. The pattern is remarkably consistent. Where Indo-European languages are spoken today, steppe ancestry is present. Where they are not, it is reduced or absent. The Sintashta culture, a later steppe group from the southern Urals dating to around 2100 BCE, produced the earliest known spoke-wheeled chariots. Their descendants carried Indo-Iranian languages into Central and South Asia. The genetic data shows that Sintashta people descended from the same Yamnaya population that had expanded into Europe, but their eastward branch carried a different daughter language that would become Sanskrit, Persian, and Hindi. The same population, two directions, two language branches, one genetic signature. The ongoing genetic revolution has not closed the Indo-European debate, but it has permanently eliminated one possibility: that these languages spread purely through cultural contact without significant population movement. The trade hypothesis, the idea that Indo-Europeans spread like pottery styles, through prestige and economic advantage without the physical movement of large populations, is dead in its strongest form.
The DNA proved people moved. When 90% of ancestry changes, the language changes with it.
The remaining question is whether the deepest root of the family, the connection between the Anatolian branch and all others, can be explained by the same model. Future ancient DNA from Bronze Age Anatolia may resolve it. Reich's team recently proposed that the Proto-Indo-Anatolian source may have been in West Asia, with the Yamnaya responsible for spreading the later nuclear Indo-European branch into Europe and Central Asia. What is clear is that the old debate, pots or people, trade or migration, has been answered. At least for the northern two-thirds of the Indo-European world, the answer is people. Every modern European carries steppe ancestry. Every Indo-European language spoken in northern and central Europe arrived after the Yamnaya expansion. The correlation between genetic replacement and language replacement is as close to proof as prehistoric studies can offer. The irony is sharp. The most important migration in European history, the one that determined what language the continent speaks, was invisible to archaeology for over a century. Nobody knew it had happened until geneticists opened the bones. Archaeology saw the pots. DNA revealed the people behind them. In Hack's words, the great power of the genetic data can be seen from the fact that they could almost date skeletons based solely on whether they carried one, two, or all three of Europe's ancestral components. The step signature is that clear, that distinctive, that overwhelming. Harold Meller, director of the State Museum of Prehistory in Halle, which provided many of the specimens, noted that the similarity between corded ware and Yamnaya material cultures could now also be testified scientifically through genetics. The material culture matched, the DNA matched, the timeline matched. The only thing missing was the language, and that is the one thing that bones cannot carry. But the circumstantial case is now overwhelming. A population that replaced up to 90% of the genetic ancestry of a region almost certainly replaced the language too. That is how language change works in every documented case from recorded history. The pre-Indo-European languages of Europe, whatever they were, left almost no trace. Basque, in the mountains between Spain and France, is the only surviving pre-Indo-European language in Western Europe. The Basque population also has among the lowest steppe ancestry proportions in Western Europe, a genetic echo of the pre-Indo-European world that once covered the continent. The language that vanished left its genetic signature in the people who still resist the Indo-European tide. 5,000 years later, the builders of Stonehenge spoke a language we will never know. The people who replaced them spoke something ancestral to English, German, French, Spanish, Russian, Hindi, and Persian. That language family now covers more of the planet than any other. 3 billion speakers from Iceland to Sri Lanka, from Reykjavik to Colombo, and it began with a group of cattle herders who left the grasslands north of the Black Sea 5,000 years ago. Every petrous bone that yields a genome, every new skeleton sequenced from the steppe or from the communities they encountered, adds another data point to the most complete picture of prehistoric migration ever assembled. The trade hypothesis held for decades because it was elegant. Language spreading like technology without the messy reality of mass population movement. DNA proved that the messy version was the true one. People did not adopt Indo-European because it was useful. They spoke it because the people who carried it replaced them. The next frontier is ancient DNA from Bronze Age Anatolia, Iran, and the Caucasus, the regions where the deepest branches of the Indo-European tree diverge. Those genomes may finally resolve whether the Yamnaya carried the proto-language or an already differentiated daughter branch. Until then, what the DNA has settled is this: the dominant mechanism by which Indo-European languages reached Northern and Central Europe was not trade. It was not cultural prestige. It was not the slow adoption of a useful tongue. It was migration on a continental scale. A wave of people carrying cattle, wagons, horses, copper, and a language that would come to dominate half the planet. This is what he may have looked like: brown eyes, dark hair, skin neither as dark as the early European farmers, nor as light as the populations he would create through mixing. The correlation is the closest thing to proof that prehistoric studies can offer. The people who carried the DNA also carried the language. The language you are hearing exists because cattle herders left the steppe. They did not come to trade. If the Yamnaya had stayed on their steppe, if they had never loaded their carts and crossed the rivers west, what language would Europe speak today? What language would you be thinking in right now?